Welcome to today's session. I'm Alex Rossino, Principal Research Analyst at Deltek, and today we're discussing small business survival tips with Deniece Peterson, Director of Federal Industry Analysis. Deniece, the current federal market is really challenging for small businesses. What's the biggest issue that small businesses should be considering when preparing to navigate this market?
I think the biggest issue for small businesses, and it may sound obvious, but it's finding their place on the competition spectrum. We have small businesses in a really awkward spot, a lot of them, where on one hand, they are finding themselves competing with mid-sized and large businesses that have started to venture into smaller contract awards because of the contracting environment. So they find themselves competing with these large companies in full and open competitions that they haven't really haven't experienced that before. And then on the other side, we have the impact of the size standard changes out of the Small Business Administration over the past year or so, where the size standard for set-aside contracts in many cases doubled. So they find themselves, yes, competing against other technically small businesses, but larger small businesses than they're accustomed to, competing for the same bucket of set-aside work. So finding out where they fit in that broad spectrum. And competing against companies that they're not accustomed to, that can be pretty difficult. And of course, there's lots of other issues for small businesses, things like making sure that they're getting paid on time. They're small, they can't afford to kind of float while payments and things like that kind of trickle down from the government through, in many cases, prime contractors. So finding that balance of being able to function while that cash flow issue happens. And also things like contract bundling. Where they're trying to bid on sizable work, because in many cases it's one contract that can keep a small business afloat, but making sure that it's not too much work, that they can handle it and not impact their positioning in the federal government moving forward. So I think it's a difficult market for small business, but there's a lot of very successful small businesses that have been able to find that right balance even as the market starts to evolve.
So speaking of competition, there are only so many small business set-asides, so teaming's a critical factor, which you mentioned. Are there any suggestions for how small businesses can forge successful partnerships with each other and then also with large businesses?
Right. Well, I think one thing that I hear all the time from companies that really want to engage in successful teaming is that they want partners that can bring opportunities to the table and also bring agency relationships to the table. So I think that's important in terms of small businesses really having some success, working hard to develop relationships with customers that even some large businesses don't have, and kind of have something to bring to the table, because they may be one of hundreds or thousands of small businesses that want to partner with a large company. They have to be able to bring something interesting and compelling to the table. I think another thing, and companies of all size can kind of have this issue where they aren't always as really honest about what their strengths are, and doing that internal analysis to really figure out where their true strengths are and where they really do need partners. And I think it really hinges on that process of distinguishing between core capabilities and competencies. Core capabilities, that's kind of your bread and butter. That's what you do better than anybody else. You may be able to do other things. You may have other competencies, but in many cases, some companies will overlook really strong partners who do something great that they only do okay, because it's on their list of offerings. So I think being really honest about that and building that into that value proposition when they're going to talk to companies about teaming, making sure they understand what they're bringing to the table and what they really need from a partner when it comes to looking at their teaming profile.
So what can small businesses do to be more competitive in this market?
Well, I think in many cases it's a matter of small businesses starting to kind of think like large businesses and looking at how those larger businesses are approaching the market, and then tailor that to their small business resources. So whether it's looking at how they identify opportunities, maybe creating a more formal, structured pipeline management process, because in many cases they're very informal, not a lot of structure. So I think as small businesses start to grow, they need to build in more structure and formality into that process, especially as they start to bid on and many other things. So I think that'll be really, really important. Other things, looking at some of the tools that they're using. So, many small businesses are kind of stuck using, Excel spreadsheets for a lot of things. Maybe starting to look at, simple, small CRM applications or, knowledge management systems to really help them collect information and facilitate the use of that information. So they're spending more time on figuring out the action from the information versus, how are we going to collect it and share it. So I think looking at large and mid-sized businesses, what are they doing? And then figuring out how they can incorporate pieces of that within their own environment.
Great information. Thanks very much for your time today.
Thank you.